Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the last technical session of this seminar. And this last technical session, or technical session number 4, is about policy implications in managing biodiversity and ecosystem services in socio-ecological production landscapes. And today we have not only very interesting topics and titles to be presented to us, but the presenters are again stalwarts in their own field. They've done original work, and the other thing is they've been doing this work for many, many years, and they can link these things to policy. They have access to those levels. So I think we are fortunate to have them, and I'm really grateful to all the speakers for accepting our invitation to be part of this session. The session chair today is Dr. Ghanesham Sharma, as I mentioned, who heads the Mountain Institute in India. So over to you, Dr. Sharma, to take the session forward. Thank you.
Namaste, konnichiwa, good afternoon to all the speakers, the eminent speakers today, and all the participants of this very prestigious seminar on socio-ecological landscapes. First of all, I would like to thank you, the organizing committee, for kindly providing me this opportunity to chair the most important session, which is on policy implications in managing biodiversity and ecosystem services in socio-ecological production landscapes. Through the National Mission on Himalayan Studies project outcome, we have been able to generate a vast amount of knowledge on biodiversity elements and a variety of ecosystem services in the socio-ecological landscapes. And we, from the very beginning, from yesterday onwards, we have been hearing from the scholars that there is a vast majority of biodiversity elements available in the socio-ecological landscapes. But now we have the challenge of how the socio-ecological landscapes can be conserved. Yesterday, Dr. Thangsulian Nolak talked about mammalian communities in the socio-ecological landscapes. Similarly, Vishal Thakre also talked about the bird communities in the socio-ecological landscapes in Darjeeling and Sikkim, Himalaya. Similarly, habitofaunal assemblies in different socio-ecological landscapes. This was discussed by Roshan Tamang, he's a scholar. Similarly, Dr. Sailendra Devan also talked about butterfly and odonate community in different land systems in the socio-ecological landscape. Similarly, Aditya Pradhan also talked about values associated with ecosystem services in the socio-ecological landscapes. Roy Judge, this is very, very interesting to note as one of the important outcomes of this project is the Mountain Biodiversity Database and Information System that is created during the course of this project implementation, which is available for everybody, for all kind of resources people are looking for. In the same way, in the previous session, we knew a lot about biodiversity conservation in Nepal, Himalaya. Then, the paradox of diversity and gradation by Dr. Leelanath Sharma from Nepal. Then again, we talked about, in fact, discussed about the other effective conservation areas of the IUCN Satayama concept, high conservation value areas in socio-ecological landscapes, and globally important agriculture heritage systems by Dr. Sarala Khaling. So we came to understand that a large amount of knowledge is available on socio-ecological landscapes. We found out that there is a diversity even within the same type of agroecosystems, such as the large cardamom-based agroforestry, which is diversity within itself, alnos cardamom-based agroforestry, mixed forest-based agroforestry system, border tree-based, large cardamom-based agroforestry, crop-based agroforestry. So even within the agroecosystem, there is a large diversity of land use stages and land use types. We also discussed about the crop world relatives and their importance for climate smart sustainable agriculture. So this was discussed by Dr. Ganesan yesterday. So in a nutshell, Sikkim Himalayan region, which also includes Darjeeling, local and indigenous communities and nature have co-evolved, creating a complex interdependency supporting biodiverse and culturally rich environments. Today, many of these areas are threatened by the parallel trends of industrialization and of rural neglect, marginalization, and abandonment. This seminar has sought to compare and capture lessons and stimulate new thinking in how best to enable appropriate active management of high-value natural and cultural landscape, socio-ecological landscape into the future via government policies. So now we have a challenge how to bring up all these issues together and influence the government to develop policies and policy frameworks and implement them so that these socio-ecological landscapes will be conserved and protected for the future generation. In fact, over the years, development agencies, NGOs, scientists, professors, and researchers are talking about the alarming situations and policy recommendations. Now our challenge is how these recommendations can be brought up to the policymakers, such as the government, for policy formulation. So we have a highly distinguished panel today. We have a plenary Dr. Yoji Natori from Japan. Similarly, we have a Pandit from Australia. In fact, Dr. Professor Ram Pandit from Australia. Dr. Madhu Verma is a senior economist from the World Resources Institute. And then we have Dr. Lewis Peake from UK. So I'll first welcome Dr. Yoji Natori for his plenary talk today. Yoji Natori is an Associate Professor, Global Studies, Faculty of International Liberal Arts, Akita International University. He has expertise in landscape ecology and conservation. He joined Akita International University in 2009, and after 16 years working with various NGOs at the Akita International University, his research and teaching build on his experiences at NGOs in on-the-ground practice and policy work in issues of conservation, particularly biodiversity, the Satwa initiative, which we are very much interested today to hear about, and natural capital, and teaches environmental science, conservation, and sustainable development. He also serves as an honorary advisor to Conservation International Japan, vice chair of the Japan Committee for IUCN, and a member of the Environment Council of Akita Prefecture. Dr. Natori, we are here very much excited to learn and understand about the Satoyama and cultural landscapes that has been widely accepted and globally valued. We'd also be interested to know more from your field of experiences about the Japanese mainstreaming of Satoyama concept and values within its agricultural policies. We'd also be interested to know more as to how the globally accredited, attributed, and endorsed Satoyama initiative and its principles of conservation, which can be contextualized to the Indian Himalayan region at large and Eastern Himalaya in particular. So for your talk, it's 30 minutes. So let me welcome Dr. Natori for the presentation.
Thank you very much for a very kind introduction, and thanks organizers for inviting me for this very important seminar. I'd like to be in person on site, but as everyone else does, but based on this current circumstance, I'm still happy to participate online. What I will present today, there might be an overlap with what has been already presented yesterday and today, but please bear with me. Let me share my slide. So the title of my talk is the role of socio-ecological production landscapes in conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Okay, and my name is Yoji Natori. I'm an associate professor at Akita International University. And before this, I was with Conservation International Japan for 11 years. And much of my talk today is based on the experience that I had with CI Japan. First of all, what is socio-ecological production landscapes? When I talk about SEPLs, it's a landscape such as this. It's agricultural landscape, but it's not just only for agriculture, but it serves as a habitat for wildlife, insects and plants. So agriculture and habitat is not mutually exclusive. As represented in this diagram, or in this picture here, the agricultural landscape here is for agriculture, of course, but it's also serving suitable habitat for damselflies and dragonflies. So aquatic environment, such as in canal here, serve as a suitable habitat for larvae. And woodlands and grasslands serve as suitable habitat for adults of dragonflies. So as I said, the agricultural landscape provide suitable suite of habitats for dragonflies. Similarly for frogs, the paddy field environment is suitable for them. The paddies, flat areas provide suitable habitat for tadpoles. And they spawn and grow into frogs, and then they can find refuges in canals and woodlands. So the landscape mosaic such as this provide very appropriate habitat for those species that's adapted to agricultural landscapes. Certainly it's not a habitat for all species, but many species are now dependent on the traditionally managed agricultural landscapes. This is in case in Japan. And so the Ministry of the Environment, Japan, recognizes the importance of landscapes such as this, traditionally managed agricultural field as Satayama. And this is taken, this picture is taken from one of the booklets, brochures they produced to raise awareness about the importance of systems like this in terms of biodiversity conservation. And agriculture that's practiced in the landscape like this is using the benefits, receiving benefits from biodiversity. So it's one of the sustainable use example of the biodiversity. And as I said, it's very highly diverse system. And the researchers, they continue documenting it. And now the database includes 63,000 species. Majority, the good portion of that is plants and insects, but other species, other groups of species can also be found. So it's highly diverse system, 63,000 species. Even though it's human impacted landscape, those species are coexisting with agriculture practices. So that leads to the concept of Satayama. It's a good, big, important realization that agriculture practice doesn't have to come on the expense of biodiversity. Actually, they can mutually support each other. So Satayama is a Japanese word that refers to socio-ecological production landscape. And the sepals now include seascapes too, but in today's topic, I guess a landscape only will suffice. So socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes. These are dynamic mosaic of habitat and land uses where harmonious interaction between people and nature maintains biodiversity. And it provides goods and services that needed by the people that's living there. And another important characteristic is that such landscapes is deeply linked to local culture and knowledge. So why is Satayama relevant in the discussion today? So I answer in three ways. It's a model for people-nature coexistence under the increasing global population and food demand. That's one reason. It explicitly recognizes the positive impact of people to biodiversity. It's often forgotten, but it's important aspect, important fact. If it's managed properly, human activities can contribute to biodiversity. And its value is globally recognized, which I will talk about in a minute. And further demonstration and amplification can bring the concept of Satayama into reality at scale. Okay. So I talked about Japanese context and the Indian context. I think June, the shifting cultivation system in Northeast, is one of the examples of socio-ecological production landscapes. They traditionally use various ways to protect lands from soil erosion, or they use the nitrogen fixing other trees to replenish the soil fertility and so on. So that provides very suitable environmental friendly context or matrix for protected areas. And community members in Northeast is also very active, engaging in conservation, establishing community conserved areas, hundreds of them. And community conserved areas by themselves are just islands, but surrounded by ecologically friendly land use, such as June or socio-ecological production landscape, then they are in good hands, in good suitable context. So that's the Indian context, Indian context, yes. And those realization, the agriculture or human production activities can be harmoniously coexist with ecosystems, the biodiversity, that led to the establishment of the concept and the initiative, international initiative called Satayama Initiative. It's a global effort to realize society in harmony with nature. And this initiative was formally launched in 2010 at the Conference of the Parties, 10th Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And and this importance and utility has been demonstrated and recognized in the 10 plus years of existence. And Satayama Initiative promotes landscape, seascape level approaches to natural resource management that doesn't exclude people, but it considers people as an integral part of the system, which is very useful when we talk about production landscapes. Human productive activities and ecosystem coexist in the landscape and seascapes. That's the basic understanding of the Satayama Initiative. And it has a partnership also established to promote, or as an engine of the initiative. It's called International Partnership for the Satayama Initiative, or IPSI. IPSI now has 283 organizations as a member as of December last year. The membership include international organizations, academia, universities, research institute, national and local governments, and NGOs, indigenous groups. So a very diverse set of partners is now joined and providing the expertise and wisdoms to the platform, so that the members of the IPSI can benefit from those pools of knowledge and experiences. Okay, and the Satayama, the idea may have originated in Japan, but the similar landscapes can be found globally. So this is just a few examples from different continents. So it's not just Japan or not just Asian concept, but it's applicable globally. Therefore, there's members of IPSI from all around the world. And the Satayama today, it may be traditional land use, but it's not locked in the past. It's living present date. So socio-ecological production landscapes, it's a model for society in harmony with nature. It's a dynamic mosaic of habitat and land use that provide higher resilience to change, socioeconomic change and environmental changes. It's more resilient to those pressures than the very monotonous or monoculture production mode. And it's deeply linked to local culture and knowledge, and it's not locked in the past. So in order for the Satayama landscape to persist and thrive in present day, it needs to innovate the resource management to survive today's world, today's changing conditions. So I'd like to emphasize the last point is very strongly because it's really important. Policy implications and regulatory framework. So going forward, I'd like to introduce one of the projects that I managed for 4 years. It was funded by Global Environment Facility and worked with partners from 10 different countries, 10 different locations that worked on these 3 themes that many Satayama landscapes or socio-ecological production landscapes worldwide faces today. So how can we have the values of socio-ecological production landscapes recognized by people living in those landscapes and also people living outside of those landscapes? How can we have those values recognized? And how can we capture and make use of the traditional knowledge in those landscapes? And how can we improve the governance of those landscapes so that they can continue to exist and continue to provide benefits to us? So the project has 3 components: site-based demonstration, that's first component; knowledge generation, try to distill information from the site-based project and have something generalizable; and also capacity building of the partners that involved in the project. And through these components, we try to mainstream biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable use into public policy and plans. So this was the partners. So Jeff as a funding agency through Conservation International. We work with these 10 site-based partners and also research institute, and also work with international organizations and conventions to address the 3 themes that I just mentioned on the previous slide. The site-based projects from around the world, 10 projects, 10 different countries, and I included Indo-Burma region, and also parts in the same area also touches the Himalaya region. It happened to include Northeast India and the Nagaland project by the Energy and Resource Institute, TERI. And this is the link, I guess I was invited to this seminar today. So it's very fortunate to have not just TERI's project, but all these 10 site-based projects. They did the excellent work and generated a lot of information that's very useful for mainstreaming Satayama-like landscapes and Satayama initiative concepts into policies and framework. Okay, so since we had a 10 project, we had a very diverse set of activities on the ground, from forest restoration to traditional agriculture, like fisheries co-management, to education and awareness raising activities, communication activities, community conserved areas in case of the Nagaland project, species inventory, scientific studies, and some project had private sector partnership, working with private sector to address conservation issues. And we also, because it's a Jeff-funded project, we had safeguards measures in place and monitoring and evaluation. So those also provided a good opportunity for sub-grantees to practice some of the safeguard measures that's internationally demanded. So important aspects included stakeholder engagement, gender mainstreaming, and also we used indicators of resilience that was developed by partners of the INSATEM initiative to monitor and assess the achievement of the project. Okay, and each sub-grantees or each project, site-based project, worked for about 2 years. And at the end of those projects, we gathered representatives from all 10 projects, gathered them in the one location in Mauritius, and discussed and shared lessons learned. And which is the genesis of this report, the issue brief. So the discussions during the Mauritius workshop led to the production of this issue brief, and we addressed 3 themes that I mentioned on the previous slides. And the issue brief provides specific responses to these questions. But what I would like to focus on today is what I think is the most important elements of the good governance. And I think that is most relevant to discussion today. So this issue brief is available at this URL. So if you're interested, I encourage you to visit and download and take a look. And if you have something interesting, please let me know. I'm really curious to know what you're thinking. Okay, so in order to get into that, I'd like to start my argument with the protected area example, protected area perspective. The parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity agreed on a set of 20 targets back in 2010 to be achieved by 2020, which is known as Aichi Biodiversity targets. You may be very familiar with this already. The 11th Aichi Biodiversity target is about protected areas and protected area expansion. So Aichi Biodiversity target 11 is stated like this. And here it it's basically protect the land, 17% of land by the network of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. And this gave rise to the concept OECM. It's a very creative acronym of the text of the convention targets, other effective area-based conservation measures. OECM. It is the supplementary to complementary to protected areas. It's a geographically defined area other than protected areas, and it contributes to in-situ conservation of biodiversity. Even though it's designated for other purposes, it nonetheless contribute to biodiversity conservation on the ground. So identification of OECMs offer the significant opportunity to increase recognition and support for de facto effective long-term conservation that is already taking place outside of currently designated protected areas, which include many of the socio-ecological production landscapes that you and I are interested in conserving. So this is one way of recognizing the value of socio-ecological production landscapes, but this takes care of only one value, and biodiversity conservation. Okay. So the recognizing values of socio-ecological production landscape is very complex because of the nature of the production landscape. So in this diagram, I'm using protected area as a comparison reference. So protected area management orientation is to minimize impact, and the conservation is an objective. production landscapes or socio-ecological production landscapes, the management orientation is to enhance the use and livelihood, and the conservation is one of the means to an end. So there's that difference, and management entities is a stark difference between the two. Protected area, since it's established by law, it's very well defined and designed. But production landscapes, it's the management entity is very diffuse, and it's de facto management agency. It's not single element, single entity, but a collection of entities contributes to form what is known, what is understood as the management mechanism for socio-ecological production landscapes. So there's a difference in management orientation and complexity in management entity. So that makes the recognition of the values very difficult. And challenge exists for socio-ecological production landscapes in the maintaining communities. Communities always changing, so maintaining the steady governance is a challenge, and sharing value is also a challenge. As an example, the 10 site-based project, that was Jeff Satoyama project, we conducted a questionnaire to identify what values the stakeholders recognize in those different systems. And these 18 categories of the nature's contribution to people that's used by IPBES. And there are some that's most popular, but you can see there are a wide range of values recognized by stakeholders. But these individually or independently recognized, it's not the totality of the values that recognized. Not a single stakeholders understood the values of all these. So these are individual perspectives. And in order to have holistic understanding, which will constitute the overall value of socio-ecological production landscapes, and has to have this perspective. And for that to happen, multi-stakeholder platform is important, and that's the point I'd like to make today. The multi-stakeholder platform as the framework for the governance and management of socio-ecological production landscape. So looking at that from different perspective, you have a single stakeholder of one perspective maybe, but you try to increase, try to broaden that perspective by including different stakeholders, so become more inclusive and different values shared, then try to identify interconnectedness. And through that process, you identify common goals that becomes the common initiative. So the number of initiative in here in the inclusive phase, it's just too many. By identifying interconnectedness and common goals, you can reduce the number of activities, and then which can be implemented by strategic programs and adaptively managed. And through this cycle, you can approach the goal attainment. And for this process to happen, so it's very important to have public stakeholder involvement, information and data generated and shared, and coordination interaction among the stakeholders need to happen. And this is a platform, the multi-stakeholder platform can serve efficiently. Okay, and yet another way of looking at multi-stakeholder platform is this. So you have action agents, producers and consumers that's working on the same landscape. And landscape have a capacity and thresholds. that need to be identified. So research community comes in here and identify the thresholds, and communicator communicates to those thresholds to action agents. Also, private sector and the government may have a voluntary standards and regulatory framework that will work on the action agents on the ground. For them to have these standards and framework in place, you need to have support from businesses and public businesses and the public. And for this to happen, you need education and public awareness. So educator comes in here, and also another set of educator, the communicator becomes important to deliver the message transform the message from education, public awareness to on the ground practice. And the scientific information need to inform the regulatory framework and standards, and also has to be used in education and public awareness campaigns. So this is a complex system. And also the action agents not just receive those guidance and constraint, but they have visions of communities, and they can also feed back to standards and framework. So all that need to happen for the socio-ecological production landscape to be managed effectively. And again, multi-stakeholder is platform is a venue that facilitate that interaction, the necessary interaction to happen.
Professor Natori, you have another 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, my watch said 2 minutes, so it's good.
Oh.
Right, I'm almost wrapping up. That's my point, and that's the most important point I'd like to make. Socio-ecological production landscapes, since the management entities diffuse and de facto, a lot of interaction, coordination, discussion need to take place, and the value sharing and understanding is very important. And for that, multi-stakeholder platform need to be instituted and practiced. Currently, there are a lot of initiatives and movements related to socio-ecological production landscapes. So all of us need to take advantage of that momentum. That momentum may be on hold because of the pandemic, but it's an important era now. The SDGs taking place. Strategic plan for biodiversity that ended in 2020, and now parties of CBD discussing post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And there's a landscape approach in socio-ecological production landscapes, particularly OECMs, is an important topic. Decades of family farming started 3 years ago, and a decade on ecological restoration. That's all relevant United Nations decade and initiative is running simultaneously, and Satayama initiative is continuing. So that's the framework or context. The socio-ecological production landscape conservation and maintenance is embedded. So we have, as you all know, a big challenge ahead, a big biodiversity conservation challenge ahead, and then windows of opportunities closing very rapidly. So next 10 years is very important, and we need to keep a very keen eye and participate in the formation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And also, rather than waiting for the parties and governments to agree on the targets, where we can, we need to get to action so that what we need to conserve can still be saved in the time we have left. Okay, so that's all we have, what I have for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I'll repeat, Thank you very much, Professor Natori, for your elaborative discussion on socio-ecological landscapes and Satoyama initiatives. In fact, we are very much interested to learn more about Satoyama initiatives. In fact, your talk on multi-stakeholder platform building and bringing together different stakeholders on the same initiative for conservation as well as for protection is new to us in our region. In fact, we also have a different set of initiatives from the time immemorial. We call upstream downstream, that is lake-based initiative. The Deoral initiative, which also talks about conservation of adjoining forest areas and also the cultivated landscapes in our region. So it's very much similar to Satoyama initiative. In fact, I'm not new to Satoyama. I was in Japan in the United Nations University for 2 years during 2005 and 8. And I had an opportunity to go around in some of the Obasuti Tanada initiatives in different areas of northern Japan. So I'm overwhelmed with your, the colossal of information that you have given to us here, and also very good information, the specific information that we can, the take-home message for us to point and also to, develop a list of what kind of initiatives we need to formulate a policy documentation which can be brought to the policymakers. So thank you very much, Professor Natori. Now, now I would like to invite Dr. Ram Pandit from Australia. Dr. Ram Pandit is an associate professor in environmental and resource economics at the School of Agriculture and Environment, the University of Western Australia. He was initially trained as a forester and later moved into the field of applied economics. And economics is now a new area to us, in fact, when we talk and contextualize our ideas and concepts on socio-ecological landscapes here in our parts of the Himalaya. Dr. Pandit holds a BSc from Nepal and has multiple master degrees: forest resources management, economics, statistics, so on and so forth, and a PhD in applied economics from the USA. He is a visiting professor at the Hokkaido University in Japan. He has published over 60 papers in his field journals. He conducts applied research in the field of environmental economics and policy, which is very, very important for us in our context, that the environmental economics and policy, which we are going to include as one of the components in drafting the policy framework for Sikkim and Darjeeling Himalaya. He also conducts applied research on forest resources management, land degradation, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem services. He also works as an expert for the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and authored a number of reports recently. He has been named as a top researcher in Australia in the field of environmental law and policy by the Australian government. So congratulations, Professor Pandit. You are really a Pandit because you have been doing research over the last many, many years and have been able to generate a vast, repository of information. Dr. Pandit, yesterday we had a very good elaborative discussion on biodiversity of Nepal, and we found out that Nepal already has a policy framework developed for conservation and protection of socio-ecological landscapes. So we'd like you to enlighten us as to how environmental economics and policy play a crucial role to validate community-based approaches to sustainable resource management of socio-ecological production landscapes, which is a harmonious relationship between the nature, environment, and the people who inhabit to ensure community and environmental well-being, as well as to build a resilience in the ecosystems and support this well-being. So we'd also be interested to learn from your experiences some specific policy recommendations on conservation and protection of socio-ecological production landscapes in the context of Sikkim, Darjeeling, Himalayas. So Dr. Pandit, you have 20 more minutes for your presentation. Dr. Pandit, over to you now.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Sharma, for your elaborative introduction. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Bhuj Acharya and Sarala Kaling for invitation to this very interesting and timely conference in which I can be a part of. Am I audible? Is my slide?
Yes, it's very much audible, and your slides are visible. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I feel a little bit awkward in the sense that my talk is partly being already presented by different authors in different ways, and I would like to take a little bit of a higher level view of what is happening in mainstreaming biodiversity conservation and ecosystem services, and some of my observations based on these initiatives or works done by different agencies, research institutions, and so forth. And in terms of Dr. Sharma's question or suggestions to me, I'd like to talk a little bit on science policy integration, why that is important, how can we do irrespective of the geographical scope of the science policy space. I'd like to emphasize that as I move on. But some of the things that I will be talking here is just a reminder for the audience, because there are so many experts in this field who have worked on this space and very much familiar with this kind of information that I'm sharing. And for some, it might be a good reminder what we are doing, what we need to do going forward, irrespective of the geographical space, or in whether it is a socio-ecological production landscape or seascape or any other kind of situation in which we are talking about biodiversity conservation and ecosystem provisions or protection of the natural landscape. So with that, I'd like to start by saying that conserving nature is an urgent task. We don't have an option. Like Dr. Natori rightly pointed out, that international initiatives, national initiatives, regional or local initiatives are gearing towards how can we protect nature. If we protect nature, it protects us, I mean, in many ways. In fact, I have a film here, which short film, but I'm not going to show that, which is nature is disappearing, and what does it mean to us in terms of the values of nature. I'm doing so for one particular reason, that is Dr. Verma is going to talk immediately after me, and she's an expert on this field of valuation. So we'll learn from her talk about that. But what I will emphasize here is biodiversity is a building block. Ecosystem function or services are the factory and the products, and what they produce and we consume or we utilize or we use in many different ways contributes to our well-being at a local level, supporting our communities or household to a broader concept, whether it is a mental well-being or physical well-being or whatever we refer to. Fundamentally, biodiversity and ecosystem services are needed for our well-being. We need to protect nature. So in doing so, of course, we can go all the way back to 1987 Brundtland Commission and so forth, but I'm going to review very quickly what has happened at broadly at an international level, and then trying to zoom into the Himalayan assessment, which is part of the Sikkim, but not entirely focusing on that eastern Himalaya. This has been alluded quite nicely by Dr. Eklavya Sharma and others yesterday, so I'll be very quickly touching on this, but I will emphasize a few points around some of these major reports or initiatives, why we need to hear about nature, which we all know about it, but of course, why we are not achieving the intended objective or intended outcome that we are interested in, And is it just because our policy processes and the research or the findings are misaligned, or what can we do in order to integrate the science and policy? And that can be applicable to a local level, to national level, to international level. So that's how I'm going to talk and give you some refresher in some respect about these initiatives. When we talk about biodiversity and ecosystem services, after 2020, if we think about it, then the first thing comes to our mind is the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment by UN. It started in 2000, ended up in 2005 with many, many volumes, which gave us, in a sense, the ecosystem notion of ecosystem services a really loud voice, which means ecosystem service becomes common talk after that. What are the key findings out of many volumes I'm picking up for today's purpose is many individuals benefit from biodiversity loss and ecosystem change at an individual level, but the costs borne by society of such changes are often higher. And that's the misalignment from economic point of view, the individual costs and benefit versus the societal costs and benefits. When that is misaligned, then we see degradation. An unprecedented effort would be needed to reduce the rate of biodiversity loss by 2010. That was the finding of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2005. Then came the UN Decades on Biodiversity. Dr. Natori rightly pointed out about the HE Biodiversity Target 11, extending the protected area coverage. Except that particular one, and of course, developing the National Action Plan for Biodiversity Conservation, most of these HE biodiversity targets were unmet. We are now in 2020 talking about post-2020 biodiversity framework, but our aspirations were not achieved that we were thinking we could do by 2020 under the UN Decades under the HE biodiversity target. So there is a problem. Then around 2010, particularly focusing on the policymaker, the Economics of Ecosystem Services and Biodiversity Initiative was launched, and they produced a report talking about, in many volumes, with a focus on policymakers, trying to mainstream the biodiversity, conservation and ecosystem services into the policy framing. With that objective, many researchers, scientists, policymakers worked together and produced volume of reports. And a simple fact about the value of nature was reflected in one of the reports there. We were still continuing to lose the natural areas. We still do now. 11% of natural areas that were there in 2000 could be lost due to agricultural expansion, infrastructure, and climate change by 2010. Conserving nature is a good investment from economic standpoint. As an example, estimated $45 billion of US $45 billion per year investment in protected areas alone could deliver ecosystem service worth of $5 trillion per year. So we can think of protecting nature or conserving nature as an investment scheme, and there is a good economic return on that. That was the finding of this report. Fairly recently, last year, we have all heard about the, I hope we know about the work of the Professor Partha Dasgupta, and he published his review, which is the Economics of Biodiversity, also called as Dasgupta Review last year. And he took this stand of nature as an asset. From economic point of view, if we think about asset, yes, I mentioned about investing on something in order to get the return. So nature is an asset, and we need to manage nature from that perspective as well. That's not the only perspective, but his stand is considering nature as an asset, a vital asset for our livelihood and well-being. What is happening is, if we want to continue with the current mode of our living, if we want to maintain our current living standard, we need 1.6 Earth. But in fact, we just have only one Earth. So it means there is a fundamental mismatch between what we demand from nature and what nature can provide us through its natural processes. How to bring that gap? How do we manage that gap between our demand from nature versus nature's ability to produce those goods and services for us, irrespective of the spatial scale? is we need to have an approach that will bring this demand and supply into the same level. On that, governments, if we think in terms of what is happening, governments pay people more to exploit nature than to protect it and to prioritize on sustainable economic activities. We have seen some of the examples from various talks that our policies and activities sometimes are not beneficial in the longer term. And particularly the subsidy schemes in many different countries for different things are harmful to the environment rather than what we are spending to protect the environment. So that's his finding. And much more interesting on that is, is the idea that if we compare just between 1992 and 2014, if we consider this capital, natural capital, human capital, and the built capital or produced capitals per capita doubled between just around, let's say, 22 years. It was doubled on a per capita basis, even by bearing it in mind that the population grew up from certain level in 1990 to 2014, but produced capital per capita doubled. If we think about human capital, which is about the health and education and so forth, at a per person basis, it was also increased by about 13%. But when you think about natural capital, the stock of natural capital per person declined by 40%. It is 40% just between 22 years. Means our activities or our actions, what we are doing with nature is creating enormous challenges and problems to us. What is the solution? The solution starts with a very simple understanding and accepting a simple truth. I'm not saying that the audience and the presenter here who presented a very interesting and very useful talk, we don't know about it, but in a broader sense, we need to understand or accept the simple fact. Our economies are embedded with nature, not external to it. And we need to have a transformative change on three fundamental things, which can be done in many different ways. There are 18 different options to do that. First, conserve and restore natural assets, restoration and conservation at local to global level, improve our decision-making through natural capital accounting. We need to account nature and bring that into our mainstream economics or mainstream way of measuring our progress. And also we need to reform our education and economics, to reflect the role of nature. So we need reform in our educational system as well. And there are many different ways to do that. And I'm not going to go and talk about these individual 18 options, but they are color-coded. If we look at a slightly darker blue, those options are balancing the impact equation, which is the demand and supply. For example, conserve and restore natural assets, improve efficiency of extraction from nature and produce less waste, fair and sustainable consumption, production and supply chains, better management of land and sea to benefit both nature and people, improve access to community-based family planning and reproductive health. These are all to balance the impact equation, which is demand and supply, balancing the demand and supply equation. Similarly, we have change of our measures of economic success, empower citizens to make informed choices and implement change, effective institutions involving all levels of society from local to global, a global financial system that supports nature, reform education and economics to reflect the role of nature. And similarly, we have this transform our institution. The color this I just shown is about transforming our institutions and the systems. And this light blue indicates changing our measure of economic success, which is adopt inclusive wealth as our measure of success, not just the GDP, the gross domestic product, which only captures the economics. When you convert everything into economic term, then only it captures. Nature directly doesn't enter into it. Improve our decision-making through natural capital accounting. So these are different options that we can adopt in order to bring this transformative change. In that process, another initiative or the institution that was established under the UN is Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It is similar to the IPCC for climate change, but it works for biodiversity and ecosystem services and closely related to the CBD. It has done very many work assessing the scientific knowledge or local and indigenous knowledge around biodiversity and ecosystem services at a global level to the regional level on various themes and produce very many reports. These are just a glimpse of that. A paper was published out of the Global Assessment of Ecosystem Services and Biodiversity last year, which highlighted what is happening in nature in terms of these different forms of, ecosystem services. But in IP-based terminology, they are referred as nature's contribution to people. Here in the first column, we have 18 different kinds of nature's contribution to people. This is the 50-year global trend. You can see all the arrows are heading downwards, except in rare instances, the arrows are heading upward or slightly upward, which depends on a particular indicator looking at the energy. For example, if you look at the extent of agricultural land, potential land for bioenergy production, which is increasing, which will increase if we look at the trend. Similarly, if you look at the food and feed in terms of the extent of agricultural land or potential land for food and feed production, it is increasing. Otherwise, in many respects, for many different indicators, we are seeing a scenario which we don't want to see. Same is the situation with extinction risk from different taxa. If we look at a different, the red list index of species survival since 1980, we see the situation is not great. So why this is happening? I'm not going to go and talk about it because we all know what are the drivers. We all know what are the indirect drivers. Until and unless we touch on the indirect drivers, if we aim to address only direct drivers, for example, land and sea change, exploitation, climate change, pollution, invasive alien species, and others, we are not going to get to the good outcome in the longer term. So we need to deal with these indirect drivers. That's where these demographic and socio-cultural things, economic and technological, institution and governance, conflict and epidemic kind of factors come in, which is closely linked to the theme of the conference, which is what can we do at a socio-ecological landscape level, which are rooted in some ways within these indirect drivers. We need to act on that level, demographic and socio-cultural context and the factors associated with that. If we talk about the Asia-Pacific assessment, in a one sentence, if I want to say this, the population of large wild mammals and birds has declined across the region. We can see what is happening in the red list index of species survival in Asia-Pacific, divided into different regions within Asia-Pacific. If we zoom into the South Asia, which is the black line, all of these lines are indicating that our effort is not producing the outcome that we wanted. Himalaya. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'm a novice to this. I know I'm from Nepal. I know about the Himalayas and so forth, but the work done by the ICIMOD, as Dr. Akita International alluded yesterday and others talked about it, it will be unfair for me to talk too much about it. But the point I'm trying to make here is there are some additional challenges that we need to address in the Himalayas compared to the global challenges or global causes that I outlined earlier based on this assessment. And these additional challenges are solid waste management, haphazard development, and need of good governance. This is just the report published and some of the findings of this. As I mentioned, one of the important thing it highlights is the...
Professor Pandit, you have another 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. An integrated and transparent ecosystem approach at the landscape scale. This is a very emphasized finding of this assessment, and which is what we are talking not only at a local or regional or national level, even at the transboundary level. What can be done to change this situation? And when you think about it, governance comes in the center. Governance, by using different kind of leverage points, those are policy provisions, and applying multi-factor interventions at different levels, including incentives, capacity building, cross-sectoral cooperation, preemptive actions, assuming something is going to happen, and decision making in the context of resilience and uncertainty, and environmental law, and implementing them in order to bring a whole suite of positive outcome in relation to nature, biodiversity, and ecosystem service provisions. So I gave a glimpse scenario, but how do we link these findings, scientific findings, with the policy processes? We know a linear model in which policymakers have some demand, scientists go out and do research, find solution, and pass on to policymakers, and they will implement it. That's a linear model in which the advice, policy advice or decision making are a separate domain. But a better model in order to integrate science and policy is to look at the research, the problem and the research question jointly between the scientists and policymaker and other stakeholders, not only scientists and policymakers, all other stakeholders, industry, NGO, associations, and so forth, and promoting this inter and transdisciplinary research at a multi-domain working groups that include both scientists, policymakers, and various experts from various fields. Put in place a structure that incentivizes schemes that support interactive dialogue in the longer term. This is an important point. We often do this interdisciplinary work on that basis, but we need to have this as a sustained practice. For that, some sort of incentive mechanism have to be there for those who are involved in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research and support for that purpose. So there are different models in this respect. We can see industry, university, and policymakers or government coming together and applying different models in different countries. These are just an example. There could be many more. And I would highlight this one, the work of the ATREE and the Sikkim University. The basis of the seminar itself is another excellent example of this integrating science and policy through collaborative learning. I will take only one more minute, I hope, which is what I want to emphasize, how this science policy integration takes place within the IPBES context. It is not just about producing the outcome jointly in the form of co-production, but the language, the communication is fundamentally important. The messaging matters. We found a very interesting outcome or results of a scientific research, but how do we frame it to policymakers? In order to make the real things happen on the ground, our framing is important. And in the IPBES approach, this framing kind of barred you to use some sort of words that gives a bit of a sense that, oh, you should do this, you must do this, you ought to do this. And this sort of language is not permitted in their message framing for policymakers. Rather, it is framed as if you want to achieve a certain outcome, then you need to do it. So a gentle, maybe passive voice, using passive voice to frame it in a way that there is an outcome if you are interested in, of course, policymakers are interested in order to achieve that outcome, you rather need to do these and these things. So that sort of framing would be perhaps more palatable and useful for policymakers, and our science communication also matters in order to integrate scientific finding in policymaking and implementing that. So at the very end, what I would like to highlight is there are ample evidences and experiences that suggest biodiversity loss and ecosystem service degradation are affecting our life and livelihoods. Mainstream biodiversity and ecosystem service requires transformative changes at different scales from local to global, ensuring our demands on nature do not exceed its supply, changing our measure of economic success to guide us on more sustainable path, including inclusive wealth as a measure, and transforming our finance and education systems to enable changes and sustain them for our future generations. Science policy integration is at the center of all of these changes in policy and practice to bring a real change in halting biodiversity loss and improving ecosystem service provisions, and ultimately our livelihood and human well-being. With this, I'd like to thank you for providing me this opportunity to share some of the things which I haven't done it, I have read it, learned it, and shared with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pandit. You are really a Pandit. You have started with multilateral agreements since CVD and multi-stakeholder transdisciplinary researches such as the Millennium Ecosystem Assessments, and then to Dasgupta Review, And we've been able to understand, how biodiversity conservation measures have been applied through different means, through different approaches, and somehow one way or the other, we could not be able to achieve some of our targets, and we're still losing our biodiversity. In fact, slightly going back to Dr. Natori's presentation, he talked about multi-stakeholder, but now into your presentation, we came to understand multi-factor interventions, the cross-sectoral interventions, bringing people together, the transdisciplinary approaches, and frame a policy, with policymakers and other transdisciplinary agencies together, so that we can bring about a very comprehensive kind of work, and that can be implemented by policymakers. And also, I would like to thank you that you have validated the work carried out by Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment and the Sikkim University, specifically Dr. Bhoja Acharya, because they've been jointly doing this research in the last 3-4 years. And in fact, Mountain Institute and other institutions are also involved in. And this is a joint effort and a contribution to the humankind in our parts of the Himalaya, that we have been able to generate a lot of information. And now we would like to influence the policymakers. In fact, policymakers were always together with us. And as you said, that ours is a transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach, and we'll be able to, I hope that we'll be able to do justice to this vast repository of information, bring it into a policy framework, and influence the government to develop a policy and implement it on the field. Thank you very much, Professor Professor Pandit. And now I would like to introduce another very, very eminent scholar who have been working in the Indian subcontinent for the last many, many years. And she is Dr. Madhu Verma. Madhu Verma is the chief economist at the World Resources Institute, New Delhi. Before that, she was a professor of the Environment and Development Economics and coordinator in the Center for Ecological Services Management at the Indian Institute of Forest Management for 25 long years. Her expertise includes ecosystem services valuation and green accounting, which we would be interested to know more about, conservation finance and incentive-based mechanisms. Currently, she is involved in economics of nature-based solutions and doubling farmers' income using agroecological principles and go benefits from green interventions. So this area is very much interested, area which is very much interested for our parts of the Himalaya. She led many influential projects like revision of NPV and cost benefit analysis of forest diversion in India, economic valuation of tiger reserves in India, economic valuation of accounting of forest across several states, developing formula for 13th, 14th, and 15th finance commissions for allocation of grants and taxes to the forestry sector, to name a few. In November 2009, she was selected by UNESCO as one of the 30 eminent women scientists of India for an upcoming report, Indian Women in Science, which will examine barriers and challenges for promotion and participation of women in science and provide a roadmap for promote and retain women in science education related careers. Congratulations to you, Dr. Madhu Verma, because you have been doing so much of work for India and for conservation of biodiversity and forest resources. Currently, the government of India has initiated natural capital accounting and valuation of ecosystem services. So I would like to request you to enlighten us on economics of nature-based solutions and doubling farmers' income using agroecological principles, because we are in the mountain systems, and the increasing or doubling productivity is very, very tough job for the farmers, and considering the amount of variations that climate has brought in and other developmental activities that have given pressure to us. Doubling farmers' income is a challenge for our farmers. and co-benefits of green initiatives, which would be interested to know about, would be accepting a doable policy recommendation which can be contextualized in our region of the Himalayas. So Dr. Madhu Verma, over to you. You have 20 minutes now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, for this very generous introduction. Well, first of all, request for the host to enable my screen sharing because I'm not able to share it now. Well, thank you very much once again for giving me this opportunity. Well, as you rightly said, Dr. Sharma has been my work for last so many years, I would say almost 27 years now that I'm constantly working on this domain of economic valuation, ecosystem services, and then of course, green accounting. So I'll take the baton forward from Dr. Ram Pandit, who very nicely, very eloquently, in a very detailed fashion, explain the processes which have happened to bring this knowledge to the plate or the table of policymakers, and not just policymakers, all set of stakeholders. Well, it is very important to convey your outcomes because we all academicians work very hard, definitely, to enrich our own body of knowledge, first of all, and now to take it forward for the end use by the different set of stakeholders, and mainly the policymakers. So messaging, framing is very, very important for these set of stakeholders. And that's where the evaluation of ecosystem services and biodiversity plays a very important role, because I've experienced through my own, interaction with the whole set of stakeholders. Any amount of, textual information would be good to some extent, but it's not memorized for a long term. The memory is very, very short for that. But if you convert your, expressions into some kind of quantifiable numbers and some kind of qualitative expressions as well, because everything can't be, put into monetary values and physical numbers, then it really hits the, chord, and then you can be able to convey your point and your argument very well across the set of policymakers who can take this forward and affect your work on ground. That's what the entire work is all about. And just quickly summarily presenting, a few things, because focusing more on agriculture, which is discussed more in this particular seminar, and then the work which ATREE and Sikkim University have done, it is basically to enrich, learn from that, takeaways from that work, and plus also provide sort of knowledge to them. Dr. Ram Pandit very nicely explained, and before that also the keynote speaker, Dr. Yoji Natori, gave huge account of information on the application of these things, these aspects. So I'm just broadly mentioning about a few things that we need to keep in mind while having takeaways in terms of policy, institutions, market mechanisms, and also creating sort of incentive-based mechanisms, creating payment for ecosystem services kind of. This is what my presentation is all about. So we first of all have to identify, if we want to have that ultimate intent to be achieved, have to enlist ecosystem services which you get from various ecosystems. We talked about the mosaic of ecosystems and ecosystem services in the last session of nature-based solution, Dr. Madhav Karki. Then we have to take this thing forward by economic valuation, method, or the process where we try to quantify them physically first, and using an evaluation method, convert them into some kind of monetary or qualitative values. Then ultimately, as you rightly said, Dr. Sharma, we have to put these values in a kind of a framework called as environmental accounting, where we tend to understand a typical accounting process. You open the accounts at the beginning of a financial year, tend to understand what is the status of the environmental values or ecosystems health in the beginning of the year. What happens throughout the year? Maybe ecosystems get enriched, they get degraded. At the end, you've got some value, and you get to understand what is the actual value of these, of the what we call as flow benefits, what is potential being kept for future, how much investment is required to further enrich these systems and take and to be conserved and to be taken care of better. That's what ultimately links to the financial mechanism, which we'll talk about in the what you mentioned in my finance commission work broadly. And converting the values that you have done, it is not end of the process unless the value is converted into some kind of payment mechanism. It is like assessing the value of your house, and then you work out either the value of rent or you work out the value of sale. Similarly, all those assessments of economic valuation should convert into some kind of economic instrument, then only things can be affected on ground. That's what is the idea. So this is a very timely, this is happening when we are embarked upon the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. We are restoring these ecosystems, conserving them, making interventions, and trying to reimagine, recreate, and restore these ecosystems so that we can get better benefits, better returns, human well-being can be definitely enhanced. And we do this through the landscape management, and intent is also to achieve indirectly, directly also these sustainable development goals, because targets have to be achieved by 2030, and also NDC targets. India has also made a case in FAO for finally into UN, and we just 2013 declared as International Year of Millets, which is we are quite enriched in millet cultivation, and the Himalayan states is a very good I would say home or resident of these millets, and they promote a lot. Just quickly, a snapshot of the work that I have done in the previous organization at IFM. They all are, none of the study I have done in IFM, almost 49 reports were produced, have gone, just as academic work. They've all ultimately gone into some way or the other in policy, or by creating some institutional mechanism, or by putting them into some kind of market mechanisms or economic instruments. So what Dr. Ram Pandit rightly said in the end, that you must raise your voice. Passively you convey, or sometimes you have to really raise your voice to convey to the set of policymakers about the outcomes and how they can internalize these outcomes in their own initiatives, their own implementation process. So WRI, this has been the forte to actually also convert our work into op-eds, commentaries, and review papers. And so there's a couple of publications I've done in the last 2 years. Some of these snapshots are here. Constantly worked on agriculture a lot. Also nature-based solutions, also millets, we did forest land, and we of course talk about tiger as well, and financing nature conservation. There was a tree cutting going on, which was discussed in the last session. We worked at the value of that, the gross ecosystem product value kind of thing, we have been doing immensely. And Dr. Ram Pandit did talk about the best process, and the nature's contribution of people was highlighted. And he showed the trend analysis, how 17 ecosystem services are declining or increasing. That was a part I worked with my team of nature's contribution to people. The paper got also published. So a couple of things are happening. So that's what I'm wanting to say, that we must convey at larger platforms the outcomes, and then that's how things can be taken care of in the process. So 2 major reports that I have been internalizing in my current work, and internalizing the past work as well. And I was part of these processes as well. The T process, which Dr. Ram Pandit talked about, the SIA framework, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, also been part of a couple of workshops which evolved this structure, and did a landscape assessment for entire country in India to see how much work is being done in the domain of valuation, accounting, payment for ecosystem services like that. So very interestingly, sometimes the taglines make the whole difference in kind of approach you are following and what you have been doing. It's kind of moral of the story. So the team assessment gave a very interesting tagline called it making nature's value visible and measuring what we manage. We're managing agroecological systems, forests, wetlands, rivers, everything. But we don't know the value that these systems are providing to the whole economy and to the ecosystem itself. So that's what is the idea, to work out the value of ecosystems, get to know the health as well. What Millennium Ecosystem Assessment did was a health assessment of all these ecosystems, whether the health is bad, it is good, it is improved, like that. And then accordingly, you require requisite amount of support systems or investment or care to revive these systems. That's what ecological restoration also talks about mainly. So this is what, you must have seen this diagram many a time. Just to quickly give you a snapshot of that. So ecosystems and biodiversity expected expressed through ecosystem services, which are the benefits coming from the functioning ecosystem. The dead ones will not give you anything. So this is kind of a very broad expression of what we get from an ecosystem: water purification, soil contamination reduction, climate regulation, nutrient cycling, habitat for organisms, flood regulation, source of pharmaceuticals, formation of human infrastructure, foundation of human infrastructure, carbon sequestration, provision of food, fuel, and fiber, cultural heritage. We talk about a lot in a best process. That's what you can see on the right side. This is the nature's contribution of to people, and then that's what we talk about cultural richness as well in the whole system. Coming to the agriculture, which is the center of our discussion mainly across this webinar, this seminar, is we get huge amount of support from agroecological systems, because they're not just provisioning services, source where we get food, fiber, fuel production, but we provide lot many amount of non-marketed services: water supply, soil conservation, climate change mitigation. Yoji talked about in the morning in her session. And similarly, they receive from other systems as well, because it's a landscape you're talking about. Agriculture receives a lot from forests, from wetlands, from rivers, like that. They're getting this support. But at the same time, we also receive a lot of ecosystem disservices from other sectors, like the pest damage, competition for water from other ecosystems, and competition of pollination services as well. These services they provide, if it is inorganic, it is kind of, they lead to habitat loss, because many times diversion happens. Forest land converts into agricultural ecosystems, and like that, nutrient runoff happens, pesticide poisoning happens. And that's how you have to take care of the entire system in a very systematic landscape way to take care of that. Coming to the forest, if you look at the forest, ecosystem, this is a kind of spread of ecosystem services, but this conveys a couple of things. Is first of all, forests are not just trees; they are the whole ecosystem. They are first level, second story, third story kind of forest. You have shrubs, grasses, microorganisms besides the trees. And these benefits, not just there is a whole spectrum of benefits come out of it, but they go across different, spatial zones as well. Some are used at local level, some go to regional, some go to national, still other go to global level. This is kind of a connect they have. Plus, they also solve the services and goods which you get from forests and agriculture. They address many SDGs. That's what I said in the beginning as well. So this is what is the spectrum, what we are not understanding, the total economic contribution, total ecological contribution made by these ecosystems. We just look at the apparent one, the visible one, which is extending the market mechanism, but we don't consider at all the invisible contributions which is quietly being made by these ecosystems, which need to be highlighted. Then only you can understand the system better. But at the same time, a couple of things happen, and there are a lot of trade-offs also happen in the system. It's not that you get all benefits at the same time. Look at this one. The national ecosystem will give you a couple of benefits. When we have just cropland with restored ecosystems, that will give you something. But if you want to have intensive cropland, many things have to be given up. You can see the green portion is shrinking and the black portion is increasing. So this trade-off always happens in the system, which also we need to understand. So there's a very interesting, sort of platform of software which talks about integrated valuation of ecosystem services and the trade-offs as well. That's what is the idea. We can't get everything together. Something has to be given up, sacrificed, conserved. Like we want to have more biodiversity services from a forest, have more landscape value, more water conservation, more carbon sequestration. You have to reduce felling from forests. Otherwise, if the trees felled, many services go away. That's what is the idea of this particular slide. So let me just quickly come through a couple of cases. The one which we are doing currently, that's what Dr. Sharma also is aware of this work. So, I couldn't meet him in person when I was visiting Gangtok. I had some other competing time claim. But my colleagues spoke to you and we got very good inputs from you in our Sikkim case study of organic farming, which are documenting this particular project. So I'm leading this WRS flagship study in approaches of doubling farmers' income, agroecological based consideration, because we have been so far considering only crops as the only output coming from the agriculture sector. But as I said, the whole gamut of services are produced by agricultural sector. So we need to consider the whole set of services together. So we were trying to look at how we can increase farmers' income, reduce cost, and then how we can set up an institutional framework, how we can create incentive-based mechanisms for farmers. But underlying, thread is agroecological principles. So looking at recycling, input reduction, soil health, animal health, biodiversity, and all those principles which constitute agroecological principles we are considering in our study. It's quite a big study. It's a pan-India study. Of course, we are using what I mentioned to you, the T framework. I will show you more about in the next slide. We're using WRS guide as well to capture that. Plus, we're combining with the DFID framework and trying to look at how we can get there. So ultimately, this is the kind of a setup in which we are working. This is what is the landscape of agricultural, agroecological system. If it's not just agricultural system as such, as a farm itself, it goes beyond the farm, it draws beyond from many other landscapes than the farm itself. So we are trying to just, Dr. Ram Pandit very rightly, in a detailed fashion mentioned about contributions that any ecosystem would make in terms of capitals of various kinds, its ecosystem services, of course, agriculture and food outputs, it gets purchase inputs, it also creates residuals. And we look at the entire value chain, how this can be, because this is maybe on-farm things are happening. More important will be how you project this. The same way that you take the takeaways from your research work to the policymakers, takeaways from a farm through the value chain to the ultimate consumer and the different stakeholders in the value chain. Plus, you're looking at the entire DFID, using DFID model, the vulnerability context of these farmers. We are basically targeting more of these small and marginal farmers. How we're making such interventions, providing them this kind of a support system, strengthening value chain and creating incentive-based mechanism, their livelihoods assets can be strengthened. So we're looking at all those aspects through this particular set of it. This quick snapshot. So we are applying the entire calculus, which we have got from here to a village to a panchayat in Madhya Pradesh. We selected carefully that, and plus we also realize we cannot document everything from one particular point or one particular geography. So we are capturing different interventions being made by individuals across India. And some examples you can see here. We are We have done documentation of millet farming in Uttarakhand, energy use in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. This is alternative energy use came in the previous session. Timbuktu Collective, which is talking more about the community-led conservation and power in the community. Andhra Pradesh, the zero budget natural farming. We are looking at the organic farming in Sikkim, for which we were there recently to cover the state and the interventions which are being made. We did a SWOT out of the interactions that we have had from a set of stakeholders and come out with a kind of recommendations for strengthening the organic farming in Sikkim. So ultimately, intent is to strengthen the whole process, the whole system, such that farmers' income can be augmented, if not doubled. Why not more than double? So that's what is the intent of this proposal. I was very happy to see, the presentation by Dr. Natori. So I'll not go into this slide. This is one of the examples of how the case that we have in organic state of Sikkim. The entire state of Sikkim is organic. So that's how you get a foot in or upper edge in the market. But still, a couple of things still to be intensified, strengthened to get that. So this is a very interesting example of Satyoma landscapes, paddy fields and forest in Japan, which was broadly covered also in the last presentation, how through organic farming, through natural interventions, you are able to raise the value of your produce, first of all, strengthening the strengthening your entire system. So ultimately, the idea is to create a set of incentives in the system so that you can support the farmers who are making these interventions. If you're asking them to shift from inorganic to organic, what incentive they have. It takes time to get the same amount of output. It takes time to also, whole transformation is little time taking. So how can you compensate? And once it is done, they should get an upper edge in the market because of not just producing an organic produce, they also build soil, they also conserve water, they also fix carbon, they also fix nitrogen like that, could come into it. So lots of such instruments are floating in the system. But we still have to actually take these forwards in our own context and our landscape. So you can just, whole set of it is available to be considered. Then if we come to the policy aspects, the policy institutions, incentives, market, all have to be strengthened. It is not just agricultural policy which will be prevalent in terms of agricultural interventions. The climate policy of the government, the water policy, the biodiversity strategy, forest strategy, regional policy, marine, in case this is the Himalaya, this is a standardized diagram which I'm using, but if it is agroecological system close to the oceanic and marine area, it becomes prevalent then. That's what is the idea of integrating different policies at the same time. Quickly come to the forest landscape, because that's what had been my intense work over so many years. Of course, a lot of work we have done across states, but let me quickly give you an example from study for tiger reserves in India, where we covered 16 tiger reserves and covered huge number of ecosystem services provided by these conserved landscapes, and because of intensive intervention being made for conservation. And just quickly see the outcomes that we got, for example, for Corbett Tiger Reserve, which shows huge amount of, I don't know how come the title got missing here, it must have got hidden somewhere. And this is the case of Corbett Tiger Reserve, where when we found out did the estimation, we found this is the contribution in terms of stock. The stock was actually timber and the carbon stored in Tiger Reserve, Corbett Tiger Reserve.
Madam, you have another 4 minutes.
Yeah, but I'll just complete quickly. Similarly, they provide flow benefits worth of 1.14 lakhs per year. And what was the most, I would say, which hit the chord of policymakers' thought process and implementation process is the investment multiplier. We simply did a calculation of the cost of management of Corbett Tiger Reserve and the value it provides. It was 368 times the rupee value get enhanced when you invest in these things, plus other services which come into being because of that. This is what you have to do in case of forest, for example. These are the 4 very prevalent values. If you are bearing cost of conservation, reducing your felling of trees, for example, then you are increasing recreation because you provide better landscape, you have better water services downstream, better biodiversity services. You must attach an instrument over there, create a conservation fund, compensate for this and bear this cost, and also compensate for the people involved in conservation. That was quickly last presentation of the Finance Commission work, which was a major trigger in the entire work I have done while in IFM for bringing so-called green bonus compensation to the forestry sector for the efforts being made to conserve forests. We had value of net present value existent in the system for diverting forests and earning revenue out of diversion, but there was nothing available as such, not much, rather say very minuscule amount to compensate the states were doing, and Himalayan states qualify usually for that. Large areas in the forest and tree cover, but fiscal disabilities being created for having a resource, but they were not able to convert, divert, and get revenue out of it. This is the meeting of 15th Finance Commission. So the 13th Finance Commission, we started working and given on economic valuation basis a formula for compensating states. There was some increase in the value from 1,000 to 5,000. We worked further in the 14th Finance Commission and also took into consideration a number of other indicators besides valuation, like fragmentation of land, biodiversity richness, particular area percentage to geographical area, like that. And then again, we were able to make a very convincing case and was further consulted. And then ultimately the Finance Commission reflected into the formula. And for the forestry sector got 7.5% weightage in the entire formula of devolution of indirect taxes to the states. It was a huge achievement. And this year, we were supposed to work not just in forest, but also in environment and the climate change. We did this assessment, and this is how we further made a case for continuation of 7.5%, plus maybe some more grant may be given, because the value which came as taxes devolution did not go to the sector, it just went to the state. It became a kind of common fund to be used by the state. So we made a case that we should have a grant as well. And ultimately this happened, that the formula became forest and ecology formula, and weightage increased from 7.5% to 10%. And there's a huge money in the very first year itself was allocated 85,000 crores, to almost $11 billion. And definitely this money should go back for the purpose of further conservation enhancement of these ecological services, different ecosystems, and ecosystem restoration. Definitely, we should really support the landscapes and these geographies for improving the quality of life of people who are engaged in conservation process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Madhu Verma. I'm a little confused because you are so eloquent and you have so much of knowledge that you expressed before us, and I could capture some of those very important points only. But then you talked about water policy, climate policy, agricultural policy, regional policy, and forest strategy, biodiversity strategy, all these things. And I'm very much interested about your work on incentives to support farmers, which is very, very important. I'm a farmer now, and as a scientist, I was working in Gangtok in some research institutes, but then because of COVID, it has given me an opportunity to go back to my farm and work with the farmers. And I know, the plight of farmers, the challenges that farmers are facing today because of globalization, because of so many other reasons. People, the farmers have not been able to increase their productivity and at the same time protect their food, because there's human animal interaction, or people say conflict. There is climate, and in fact, just before Dasera, there was a 30 hours long rainfall, and that devastated almost all paddy fields. But then even then I could collect some paddy from my field. So ecosystem services and green accounting is one of the areas which is new to us. And in fact, I would like to request you to help us, the ATREE, the Sikkim University, the Mountain Institute, to go about green accounting, so that we'll be able to at least express our farmers that there's still some incentives left with the resources that you have, and it can be a lucrative job to have employment in the farming sector than going to
exactly.
other sectors for employment. So thank you very much, Madam Verma.
Surely.
Your elaborative research and your experience, your vast experience that we could now understand from your presentation. So thank you very much. Now I will go to another presentation, which is very, very important. That is an invited talk from Dr. Lewis Peake. He has PhD in soil science from University of East Anglia, United Kingdom, and a self-employed soil scientist. I've never heard about this self-employed soil scientist. In fact, I've also worked on soil sciences and soil biochemistry. But then he is an active member of the British Society for Soil Sciences. This area is also new to us because we have been working in isolation on soils and biogeochemical cycling of nutrients in different land use forms and agricultural environments. Dr. Peake's recent work includes teaching as well as conducting soil surveys for agricultural land classification. but he has had a varied background, which includes IT consultancy and book illustration. In 2019, he was the lecturer on the BSc module Soil Process and Environmental Issues in the School of Environmental Sciences. Lewis has worked for our lives with many farmers and built up a network of farming contacts in East Anglia. You know, Dr. Lewis, because here in our parts of the Himalayas, you know, the scientists go to the farmers and talk much about what they have learned from the books. But then this is very interesting to know that you have been going to the people and learning from them and understanding or co-producing knowledge, you know, your scientific knowledge as well as the knowledge that the farmers had. Your research interests have included biochar, soil erosion, soil organic matter, land evaluation methodology, environmental impact, sustainable land use, climate change, agroforestry, soil governance, and archaeology. So this soil governance is now a new topic to us here. Dr. Peake is specifically interested in evaluating soil ecosystem services and protecting soil as a part of our natural capital. Lewis is a keen gardener and happy to advise anyone to the dark art of composting. And it would be interesting to know about this art of composting. We'd like you to kindly provide us an overview of policy and governance responses to soil change in the context of socio-ecological landscapes. I see a few alarming questions around soil governance and ecosystem services that can changes in soil management have significant impact on the seemingly unsustainable demand for nutrients. This is number one question. Number two is, can water use efficiency be improved because we are losing our water resources through the better soil management, such as the Eastern Himalayas, as springs are drying very rapidly? How will climate change interact with the distribution of soils to produce new patterns of land use? So you have vast familiarity and awareness on soil governance and land use planning for ecosystem services and biodiversity. So kindly enlighten us on how we would be able to bring this soil governance as one of the principal components in shaping up the policy for recommendation for conservation and protection of socio-ecological landscapes. So over to you, Dr. Peake. Hello.
Hello, right. So I'm now.
So you have 20 minutes now, Dr. Peake.
Okay, fine. So I share my screen now.
Okay. Please go ahead.
And can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good. And see the screen?
Not yet.
You can't see the screen?
Yes. So.
Yes?
No. Yeah. Okay. Now it has come very clear.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's quite an honor because it's a different part of the world for me to have a view upon. The reason I got invited was because I contacted Dr. Bhattacharya about Sikkim, because I was very interested in soil governance in Sikkim and the fact that it was the first organic state. And I found one of his papers in which he talked about some of the issues about farmland. So that's one of the topics that I want to focus on. I'm also very encouraged to hear so much mention of terms like agroforestry and agrobiodiversity. When I was an undergraduate in the 80s, 40 years ago, seems unbelievable, but agroforestry was a very new word then, not a new practice, of course. It's probably the oldest form of agriculture. It's probably tens of thousands of years old. But it was a new term. And as an undergraduate, I was very excited about agroforestry and trying to get other people interested. But at the time, it was very obscure. So maybe it takes 40 years for ideas to take hold. And now we don't have 40 years. So pressing on. So you all know about ecosystem services. I don't need to dwell on this for long. This is sort of standard stuff. And following with the last speaker is quite handy because there's some overlap, and that provides some kind of foundation for what I'm going to talk about. So this is one definition of ecosystem services: benefits provided by ecosystems that contribute to making human life both possible and worth living. That's one particular definition. And then the issue, of course, is translating these concepts into policy and, furthermore, implementation. And this is where governance comes in. And we've already heard speakers talking about the 4 aspects of ecosystem services: provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural. And so I want to say a little bit more about how soils is involved in that. And the other term, which we heard from the last speaker, is nature's contribution to people. Okay, so moving on. And of course, the fact that ecosystem services and biodiversity are, of course, interdependent. And you've seen this one before. It's interesting that the Madhu, the last speaker, presented this as a diagram of ecosystem services, but it is really based on soil primarily. That was the foundation of the diagram from the FAO. And there really is a wealth of services provided by soils, far more than food production. And I would also say that some of those services are provided even on intensively farmed land, and I will talk about that later. So yeah, soil has this pivotal role in biogeochemical cycles, and it also hosts the greatest diversity of organisms on the land. We tend to forget that. Under our feet is incredible biodiversity. Okay, so soil health, natural capital. Soils deliver a range of services, not just agricultural, but many non-agricultural services: carbon sequestration for climate change, water and air purification, flood control, very important. One of the problems we've seen recently in the news, floods in the UK, Germany, and elsewhere, of course, something that you're used to very much in parts of the Indian subcontinent. And often it's because of a lack of trees. The soil loses its organic matter. The tree roots normally hold water. You also get soil erosion. So massive flooding. So this is very important. Biodiversity, of course, pest and disease control, and less tangible benefits: recreational, cultural, spiritual. Because when we have a beautiful landscape, it always sits on soil. So it's a vital part of what we environmental economists call natural capital. And this is echoing what previous speakers have said in this session. So why is soil survey and agricultural land evaluation relevant to nature and biodiversity? Because often, again, yesterday one of the speakers talked about this artificial sectoral division, in which people just deal with certain topics and not others. And that's something that's very sort of important to me that I want to touch on, and often causes this problem, particularly with soils and farmland being overlooked because of different sectors and different jurisdictions. So the relevance, well, first of all, this kind of survey goes hand in hand with environmental impact assessment. Governments must also balance conservation with other land uses. And soil survey can also identify threats and opportunities. So even if the survey was primarily done for agricultural reasons, it can throw up, identify threats, pollution, erosion, flood risk, invasive species, and peat surveys. Peat is particularly important in upland areas and in the UK. And also opportunities that may not have presented themselves before. For example, by identifying areas of low agricultural value to farmers, those same areas could provide opportunities for conservation and biodiversity, afforestation, and carbon storage. Land evaluation can actually be aimed specifically at those things as well, for identifying areas to afforest or even to rewild. Legal protection of soil and farmland essentially what I'm saying is not just for the benefit of agriculture and farmers. All soils provide ecosystem services. So why is it vital to protect prime farmland in particular? Food security is more important than ever with climate change. We've had an era in the 70s and the 80s, particularly in the wealthy countries, where there has been a certain complacency because of overproduction of food. It's very good that there's now a focus on the environment, but we have to bear in mind that the world is changing in many ways because of the Anthropocene, because of the ecological crisis and climate change. And there is also more political instability. So food security is as important as ever, and we all have to eat. Farmland also acts as a buffer between urban and natural areas. And this is something that's all of the speakers are keenly aware of. This has come up again and again, that it's very important, this sort of buffer zone. It's also worth remembering that when farmland is lost to urbanization, forest is then at risk, because that farmland often needs to be replaced. Modern agriculture has caused problems, but need not be the enemy. It can be a win-win. For example, regenerative agroecosystems can provide food and biodiversity. And this could include mixed rotations, which could include pasture. We saw the picture from Boch, who showed these agro-pastoral systems in Sikkim. Agroforestry, no-till, organic, there's a long, long list, and these things can interact. And also climate-smart agriculture and integrated pest management, which is a sort of forerunner of organic, which is very common in places like Bhutan. Payments for ecosystem services can reward farmers for providing this sort of balanced system. It's mixed, planting trees, increasing biodiversity, which itself can benefit farmers through biological pest control and improved water relations in the soil. Farmland also provides ecosystem services in its own right, over and above food production. It can provide habitat and flood alleviation and carbon storage. And here's the one that might raise a few eyebrows. Prime farmland, that is the most productive soils, can sometimes even provide more ecosystem services than natural ecosystems, really. I'll go on to talk about that. This may be considered a little controversial, but it's about having a holistic, balanced view and stepping back from our own biases, again, from those sectoral camps that we tend to inhabit, either your agriculture or your environment. And we have to sometimes take a more holistic view. So which of these two environments provides more ecosystem services, would you say? The prime farmland that's cultivated, or this beautiful heathland covered in vegetation? Well, in fact, the heathland has more biodiversity above ground in its current state. The soil is sandy, acidic and dry, and has low species composition and low numbers. This kind of soil that typically supports this heath vegetation, I mean, this is European, but you would have the equivalent, not so very different, I would imagine, in the cooler upland areas in the Himalaya. This kind of soil is an impoverished environment, and the complex, rich ecosystem is an adaptation to a poor environment. The standard measure of ecosystem services is net primary production. And in fact, prime farmland has the highest net primary production. So in fact, it provides more total ecosystem services than heath. That's not to say it's more valuable or that we should not worry about protecting this. But the point is that this land intrinsically provides more services, ecosystem services in a holistic sense. And in fact, if we use regenerative methods, it could be even more biodiverse and provide more ecosystem services. So it's about having that holistic view and recognizing that this natural ecosystem is often only this way because our ancestors found this land of much less economic value. And that's often the harsh reality. That's why we can enjoy these beautiful landscapes. But they're not necessarily intrinsically more productive in every sense. So the current status of land can be misleading. This is also a slightly provocative diagram. I completely conjured this up, so I have full copyright on this. It's my photo, and I drew all the lines. So it's a sort of notional version of sort of agricultural land evaluation, if you like. So you would delineate the existing urban areas, and then you would look at class 1 land and class 2, and so on and so forth. And then these hilly sloping land would be class 5. And this would be typical like the USDA land capability classification, which is purely based on economic returns to land users. So it would start with sort of arable crops, and then it might go to tree crops, and then it might go to forestry. So it's not meant to be anything other than that. And this is just an example of where typically in a lot of countries an urbanization might be planned. But what I've done is I've tweaked it slightly. Instead of saying class 3 land, for example, I put class 3 soil ecosystem services, because that's essentially what we're talking about. It's the complete range of services that are provided that were not envisaged by the people who designed evaluation systems originally. We were thinking about agriculture or perhaps forestry, and they were thinking about economic returns. But the classification for ecosystem services provided by the soil would come out with a very similar result. So in the case here, this is completely fictional, by the way, but it's typical of the sort of thing that happens. If this were an urbanization, you have to think of the resources that you're losing. Can we actually provide an evaluation? I'm actually not seeing my heading because I don't know if I can tweak my screen, but it's blocking out my heading because of the taskbar that's dipping down from Zoom, but never mind. So essentially, this is an attempt to economically evaluate soil. And this was done by some academics in New Zealand, again, on very sort of, some would say quite crude economic measures, but it's certainly an interesting approach. And they came up with this idea that a hectare was worth 16,000 New Zealand dollars on a dairy farm, based purely on the returns. But that wasn't simply on the returns from the milk produced. It was a very complex calculation based on the value of the water resources, the carbon storage and so forth, but it was still done in monetary terms. Now, some scientists are uncomfortable with translating things into monetary terms in this way. They would say that many ecosystems services are intangible or simply essential, they're priceless. They shouldn't be quantified in this way. But environmental economists say that, well, if you don't, then you're at risk of it being treated as zero value and being lost. And both approaches are dismissed as naive and dangerous by their opponents. There is a more holistic approach, also from New Zealand, interestingly, and this is called the Land Resource Circle Framework. I discovered this quite recently. I was quite impressed. So it really looks at a combined soil and land use function and tries to look at higher level ecosystem services for the whole of society in a qualitative and a quantitative way, so that planners can use this as a decision-making aid, but not with a simple score or a binary yes or no. So it's not just about agriculture and forestry, It's about valuing and protecting soil as a vital part of our natural capital. And this is this sort of framework and the structures that are employed in the decision-making process. As you can see, it's quite complex. Okay, so soil governance and legislation. So what sort of things are we talking about here? Well, policies, we have international treaties, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, we have things like biospheres and nature reserves. There's also incentives. I've talked about payments for ecosystem services, research policies to guide resource use efficiency, certification schemes, land take targets. A number of countries have a target below which they try not to exceed in terms of the land that is consumed for urban use and sealed. And this is quite similar to the concept of land degradation neutrality. And then these can be translated into practices protecting natural ecosystems, regulation and enforcement of environmental law, restricting land take and soil sealing. I've already mentioned about the valuable ecosystem services that's provided by prime farmland in particular, soil conservation, pollution control, sustainable land management. These are all terms as well that I remember from when I was an undergraduate or shortly after. Reforestation and agroforestry, reduced or zero tillage. This is found to be extremely beneficial. In fact, a study that was done in Switzerland found that compared to organic agriculture, zero tillage actually had a slightly more beneficial effect. If you can do both, that's great. It's difficult because without any kind of herbicides, it's quite difficult to have zero tillage, but it can be done, particularly in a combined livestock and arable system. Okay, so I don't remember what my title was here. Okay, so these are state level criteria that I would expect to see as measures of good soil governance. So a national soil policy. I can't emphasize this enough. I noticed the last speaker talked about policies. Climate policy, agricultural policy, environmental policy. This is so common around the world. Soil gets forgotten. I'm not simply saying that because I'm a soil scientist. It is fundamental. It's linked to all of these other things. Environment, agriculture, and even urban development. When you think about it, it uses soil as a substrate.
You have another 3 minutes left.
Okay, I will press on. So there's a whole range of things here that I would expect to see. One or more soil laws, promotion of soil health, protection of natural ecosystems and reforestation, protection of prime farmland, LDN, SDGs, and so forth, the things that we've talked about. Education, and then finally, effective governance and a regional and global perspective as well. Okay, so there's a paradox with prime farmland protection. Environmental law tends to protect nature. Agricultural law protects soil health from misuse, and land law often protects tenure. What protects rural land from conversion and sealing? Well, it's often at the mercy of spatial planning. Planners often disregard soil. The public also often has less concern for farmland than nature. So this becomes a bit of a grey area, a blind spot. There is also intense financial pressure for poor farmers to sell their land, but farmers may end up as landless labourers or cultivating degraded land or cutting forest. So loss of farmland means profits for a few, but a big loss for society. Finally, here's a wonderful lesson from the tropics. A friend of mine, Mike Hands, he's been working on this. He's devoted about 40 years of his life, his entire adult academic life to this project. He's been working with farmers in Central America. It's not quite the same, of course, as the Himalaya, but there are some similarities. There's shifting cultivation, often quite destructive, a lot of burning. He's worked in Honduras and Costa Rica. We have landless cultivators, slash and burn, regrowth. The fire emits greenhouse gases. The ash provides a quick hit only. Nutrients are lost, and the soil is eroded. These people are intelligent. They understand the problem, but they are poor, they are landless, they have no choice. If you talk to them, they know exactly what the problem is. Okay, these are the soils, sort of technical details, particularly low in phosphate. The solution is the Guama model, Inga alley cropping. And this has been developed working closely with the local people. And there are now hundreds of people who have a good livelihood from this. It's set up by the Inga Foundation. 40 families a year are being added to this. And the great thing is that this isn't academics encouraging people. This is farmers telling other farmers, inviting them around for the day, providing them lunch, showing them around their farm. It's a sort of evangelical process of learning by seeing. Inga is a leguminous nitrogen-fixing tree. You may have species in the Himalaya, I don't know, but it also fixes phosphate. So it's got this fantastic double action. It can grow in the most impoverished soils. It's a multi-use species. It provides shade for other crops. Alley cropping means that it is grown in rows, and then just in time for the crop to grow, it's coppiced down. So the tree is left living, but it's cut down just at the time that you need light. And then after the crop is harvested, it grows up again. So that's it. Thank you very much. And that's the end of the presentation. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Peake. It's an elaborative work on soil and soil governance, and you have a vast experience on soil governance over the years, working in different parts of the world. I'm excited that you have given us some learning, some of your learning experiences on state level soil governance, and you have developed some criteria. I think that part is very much important in the context of the Eastern Himalayas. And as far as soil ecosystem services and valuation of soil ecosystem services is concerned, we are still lagging behind working on soil biogeochemical cycling and understanding, the soil biodiversity. In fact, in our parts of the Himalayas, there are some isolated approaches by some scientists and research and development organizations working on soils, but then we are still lacking, in terms of the scientific information generation as far as soil nutrient availability is concerned. And I'm very much interested to understand your Guama model, that is Inga LA cropping. Inga is a nitrogen fixing species. In our parts of the Himalayas, we have been using Alnus, that is Alnus nepalensis, the elders, as one of the nitrogen fixing species, which fixes nitrogen, but at the same time also accelerates phosphorus cycling in the soil. So it has been used by our people since time immemorial in the large cardamom-based agriculture, but also in northeastern states of India, where slash and burn, as you said, cultivation is practiced. So this is very, very important information that you have given to us. And we have got lessons from tropics, land resources, circle framework. All these things are very, very important in the context of our socio-ecological landscape policy framework. So thank you very much, Peake. Now I think the house is open for receiving some comments and also some questions. So because at the end of the all presentations, I think this is now time for everybody to raise their hands and or ask questions to whoever you want to ask to. Please introduce yourself and put your questions across.
Sir, it's me, Professor Laxman Sharma, and Dr. Lewis. Maybe a few days back, you have mailed me referring Dr. Bhoj Acharya about the soil governance in Sikkim. So unfortunately, I could not reply you, but when I listen to your topic, it is really, really wonderful, especially in the Sikkim in context of organic farming. The soil ecosystem is very, very important, especially in terms of the microbial diversity. So this is especially in organic farming system, I think we look forward to understand the assessment of microbial biodiversity, because microbes are the real drivers for increasing the productivity of the crops in terms of nutrient management as well as the pest management, sir. I'll certainly get back to you through mail, sir. We can collaborate. And of course, I'm not the soil scientist, but we can work on it, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Can I say a few words there?
Yes, yes.
Yes. What I would emphasize very, very strongly, I was concentrating on finishing in time, but the real point about protecting farmland is that Sikkim has a wonderful system, but it's at risk because it doesn't have a soil policy and it doesn't have soil laws. And it doesn't matter how benign a system is currently, it's always at risk of change without that backstop, if you like, those legal measures. It's wonderful when everyone's working in the same way towards the same goal. But if things change and then suddenly you're vulnerable if you haven't got those legal provisions to protect the best land and to protect soil. So that's what I really want to emphasize. And places like Bhutan and Sikkim are very much exposed in that way to modernization and urban growth.
Yes, thank you very much. Is anybody there for any questions? Kindly raise your hands, introduce yourself, and ask questions.
Can I ask?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
My question is to Dr. Madhu, but also to the others. I mean, while you also talked about maximizing the benefits of the landscape, of the socio-ecological production landscape, especially for the farmers. And if you look at the Himalayas today, I think the main problem has been, even if you have the land, you have these production landscapes, you see that most of the young people, the young human resource who actually work on these farmlands, they are leaving the land, and there is a huge problem of migration. The other thing is, I think even now in the social media, it's running rampant, and Dr. Bhoj has also made some comments. People just want to parcel off their land to other forms of, building, mainly for built up areas. And you have this crisscross of infrastructure. And so really the production landscape is changing so fast. And we have this overarching problem of migrating to, the big cities or elsewhere in the Gulf. So these larger parcels of land, actually many are remaining fallow. I think Uttarakhand has the same problem, Sikkim slowly, and even in Darjeeling, we see a lot of women and old people are left behind. It's only because of the pandemic, some of them are coming back. So if we want these, production landscapes to be really vibrant and really contributing to the livelihoods of the people, and really doubling farming, production and economic benefits. How do we go about it? Because I think even in the morning, I was thinking, these concepts are really good. They're really nice. And I think it makes 100% sense. But really, when we are working, even now when we are working in the field, and we do a lot of work with farmers, especially in climate change, climate smart agriculture, and zero cost kind of agriculture. But I mean, it's completely a different, situation in the field in terms of what kind of policies and schemes are saying and what we are saying. So, we are at this crossroads of trying to promote really these very, very good concepts, which is coming from very good global organizations and scientists and practitioners and policymakers. But really at the ground level, at the farm level, I think there is still, the intensive agriculture, intensive development, and not and at the cost of nature, probably, because nobody is thinking about biodiversity and ecosystem services. So to cut it short, how do we go about this, since it's a policy kind of a session? So just to Dr. Madhu Verma, but anyone else can also chip in.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for this very, very pertinent question, rather the burning question and the crux of this session, which you rightly articulated, that how focusing on policies, things can be changed and transformed. Of course, we've just finished a relatively big study in terms of understanding the entire organic farming model of Sikkim. And then in the 3 days back in the Sikkim organic farming webinar, we presented some of these outcomes. It is basically a play of policies, I would say, starting from ban on grazing, which happened in 1996, when the green felling ban was imposed and grazing ban also came into being. So people used to have a number of cattle per household. When you reduce that, they had to stall feed them, and you have to put an extra cost for getting these feed stock for animals. And when animals are there, but gradually it so happened that this was becoming costly affair for them. They started selling the livestock population. Otherwise, you're getting dung at your own doorstep, and you were using it as manure in your fields. The whole cycle, the chain of events actually happened because of it got triggered because of one particular intervention being made through a policy. As rightly said by the previous speaker, there's no such soil policy in the state. Plus, there's a policy of giving job to one person from every household, which was declared by the government, and that's why the reason youth would like to work for the government jobs, to give them more security, more stability as well. So they would prefer to do that. Plus, the subsidy part, there has been a subsidy on fertilizers and pesticides, but not much is being there for the organic farming practices. So, and then when the finally produce comes to the market, unless it is picked up from the farm itself or just close to the market, which is close to the farm, if it comes to the market like Lal Bazaar, go to Siliguri market, it gets merged with the other produce. So what you're getting as 200 rupees a kg there at your own household, outside your household, maybe in the closer local market, it might reduce to 50 rupees a kg like that. There's just some pointers, which are there. Plus, the whole value chain needs to be strengthened. You declared the entire model for the state as organic farming state, but the systems which are required to augment that, to support that, to enhance that, give them light of the day such that the produce can find good infrastructural support in terms of roads, cold storage, marketing mechanism, connecting with these stakeholders outside, connecting with the buyers outside. Plus, as you rightly said, that land is very less, and then most of the people, and Sikkim was naturally organic, naturally doing natural farming for ages together. People are mostly producing variety of crops. Is it quite variety of crops they're producing? The whole year, the field is full of something or the other. They were using it for self-consumption. So there's very little market surplus available for marketing purpose. There's lots of things if you want to really promote this thing. The whole transformative change is required in the system at the policy level, at the institutional level, at the market level, incentivizing farmers. Like I said, why can't we make a case of green bonuses we have made for the forest, for the agricultural sector as such, especially for the organic farmers, and people who are promoting zero budget natural farming kind of thing. So then only, unless you incentivize, give them some extra benefits, because there's a huge trade-off exists, as rightly said in a couple of presentations. You have to meet that, aspects, meet that load challenges that you face from that. Plus, sometimes, and as rightly said, the vagaries of nature also happens. No crop insurance, is being available. FPO is being created, but when you have an FPO, you are connected with the cooperative department, so banks will not give you loan. So a lot of conflicting, as it's a cancelling effects are happening because of competing policies many a time. So that needs to be corrected. That's what is a major broad, takeaway from what we have done. Plus many more things definitely can be added, and model can be made more, it should be reviewed, in a very serious manner, and you have to plug in all these, loopholes and make the whole model attractive to youth and, sustainable at the same time. And you should get much better, compensation in the market by strengthening the value chain, doing a lot of experimentation, making new, crops as well, which can give you better returns using organic farming models. So lots of things are required to be definitely done, and only things can succeed and sustain in future. Yeah, but we will come out with our findings maybe in a month or so, 2 months time, because we are doing a whole causal loop diagram, understanding the whole dynamics of the system, how things can, be transformed, change, triggered, such that the model can really start, it gathers momentum and can really take off from the system. Thank you. I hope I answered your question to an extent.
Can I just add my own observation on Dr. Khaling's question about migration and the challenge we are facing, particularly in the rural areas, in terms of lack of labor force, for that matter. Oops, am I?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
Please go ahead, Dr. Pandit.
Yeah, something happened to my end, but anyway. My observation is that I think the issue is twofold. One is, I guess this is the problem many countries are facing, which is the mindset of the people. When I say mindset, what we are observing these days is people want quick return from their time investment in the sense that, let's say, if you are living in the village and you have all the other kind of benefits you unknowingly capturing when you are living there with the family and in the village and engaging in agriculture. But when you leave village and go to the city center or somewhere else, migrated to different countries, then you don't realize what you lost, but you only focus more on financial return. So I think messaging what's the value of living in the village and engaging in agriculture, not just the financial return from what you are engaged with. Of course, we need to increase the financial return from agriculture sector through different mechanisms such as organic farming or any other approaches that could be applicable. But the values of being there and engaging in agriculture does not equate to just the financial return you are getting from there. So I think, how do we do this? This is a complex problem. This is a societal problem in many parts of the world. And migration, easy way to get money, and then the lifestyle changes that's happening to many people in the rural setting is a factor. My observations are big farmlands, very productive farmlands are abandoned in the hills. And we are importing crops, importing cereals or vegetables or something else from somewhere else. So it's a challenge. That's my observation. I didn't answer the question, but I shared the similar feeling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pandit. Any more questions, because we are running out of time now?
One, I think.
Oh, thank you very much. So I'm afraid if I can summarize, the whole lot of information and the presentations we had from the eminent scholars in the last 1.5 hours now. Dr. Natori talked about the socio-ecological production landscapes in conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. He also tried to define what is socio-ecological landscape. In fact, we are yet to define our socio-ecological landscape in terms of its value, in terms of its significance. Dr. Natori also talked about traditionally managed agricultural land, that is Satoema, and its benefits, the benefits of biodiversity, the benefits of different kinds of crops that are grown there. And he also said that 5,668 species can be grown within a Satoema, and this is very, very interesting. As of now, they have collected around 6,300 species. They have recorded. So the concept of Satoema is a mutually supported initiative, at the agricultural landscape level, which includes agricultural landscape and forest landscape. and it provides a lot of goods and services, local culture and knowledge. So this is very, very important. In fact, he also talked about the model, the three different models, the people, nature coexistence, positive impact on people and biodiversity, and global recognition. In fact, we are also looking for global recognition of some of our agricultural landscapes from our region under the FAO's globally important agriculture heritage systems. But Satoyama is all about everything, because that has been widely recognized and globally accredited. And he also, compared Jom and Satoyama initiative for nutrient soil nutrient conservation, carbon sequestration, and also talked about climate change. And he said that Satoyama is an initiative which is a harmonious coexistence of human and nature. This is very, very important, the harmonious coexistence of human and nature, which is happening in other parts of the Himalayas and other parts of the world. But then there are several, threats and challenges faced by this nature itself, and also by humans through their own activities. Dr. Natori also talked about the CBD's 2010 AG targets, and then he also talked about the international platform for Satoyama initiative, the initiative wherein NGOs, local governments, research institutions should come together. He talked about integrated management initiative, which is a very, very good model that he was talking about, because we do not have that integrated management model. In fact, the initiative that they have started in Satoyama, where people from different walks of life, different institutions, scientists, professors, development agencies, coming together and develop an innovative resource management model. And Satoyama is one such example. And he also talked about the ZEF project, and they worked on 3 different themes with 3 very pertinent questions. That is, how can we value socio-ecological landscapes, and then that can be recognized. He also, and another question was to capture and make use of traditional knowledge within the initiative, and improve the governance in the socio-ecological landscapes through that ZEF funded project. Then he talked about mainstreaming public policy, and this is where we are also lacking here in our parts of the Himalayas. He talked about policy frameworks for forest restoration, traditional agriculture, fisheries, co-management, education and awareness, climate change, climate sequestration, species inventory, traditional knowledge documentation, transmission, private sector partnership, all these under the project. And he talked about Indo-Burma Nagaland project, which they are trying to get into in the near future. And he said that gender mainstreaming and stakeholder engagement is very crucial in establishing the proved methods for management of Satoyama or socio-ecological landscape. So in their consultation workshop in 2018, he said that they addressed all these 3 questions. And then he talked about the HE target, and also talked about protected area perspective agreement, and the area management of other areas other than protected areas. And then he talked about OECM other than PAs, in situ conservation of biodiversity on the ground. And even if it is for a different purpose, but then it also conserves a lot of biodiversity and provides ecosystem services. So then he talked about the management challenges, within the protected areas, there are well-defined regulatory frameworks, but in the socio-ecological landscapes, that they need to be strategized, and they are diffuse, de facto, and mainstreaming. There are mainstreaming challenges within the socio-ecological production landscapes. So he also talked about total value, 18 categories that the NCP by IPBS. And most importantly, he stressed on governance frameworks, the multi-stakeholder thresholds, the action agents, the producers, the consumers, and then the private sector initiatives, the communicators, education and public awareness. All these things are very, very important when we talk about managing and conserving socio-ecological landscapes. So then he talked about the Dasgupta review. And he also talked about relevant institutions, UN Decade on Ecological Restoration, UN Decade on family farming. In fact, our parts of the Himalayas, the family farming is very, very crucial. And ours was a cashless farming system. But over the years, because new dimensions have been put in where they do not consider family farming or family labor sharing among the households, and they do not know the philosophy of family farming. In fact, this is one area where we have to look into. He talked about a strategic plan of biodiversity 2011 and 20. But then over the years, because all these challenges of biodiversity conservation, the institutions or governments are yet to achieve some of the goals. And after that, Dr. Pandit, the Professor Pandit from Australian University, talked about the Hindu Kush Himalayas. He said that he has a sense of belonging to the Himalayas, and he wants to give justice to the Himalayas by elaborating some of the achievements of the Hindu Kush Himalayan assessment reports developed and established by the ICIMOD. And he said ecosystem services, mainstreaming biodiversity and conservation, science policy integration, which is very, very important. And he said that nature is very at the crossroads, and it is very urgent to conserve nature because it is disappearing. So if we protect nature, it will protect us. And then he said that biodiversity as building blocks, and ecosystems, ecosystem functioning is a factory, ecosystem services is a producer, and all of these gives to human well-being. So I really appreciate Professor Pandit's statements on this matter. He talked about the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report of 2005, and after that, a large number of multilateral environmental agreements for achieving biodiversity conservation goals. But at the end, he said that we are still losing biodiversity, and there's a trade-off of development and conservation initiatives. And he talked about the Dasgupta review of 2021, and the Dasgupta review has said that nature is a vital asset and we should recognize. But then he said that if the current mode of use of biodiversity is concerned, then we might need 1.6 Earths for us to live in. So this is very, very important, and it's a critical question that every one of us has to answer, because we need a lot of food, delicious food, a few number of jackets, a few number of trousers, maybe a few number of pairs of shoes, and so on and so forth. So our grade is so much that it never, and there's no limitation to our grades. So this Dasgupta review is very, very crucial, and it brings in the issues in the forefront. So then he also talked about economics that is embedded in nature, and options for transformative change. This is very, very important, because everything is changing. In fact, the whole world is changing from one. In fact, the nature itself is changing, but then we are making the nature change. And so conservation and restoration of nature, improved designing of natural capital, reformation, education, and economics to reflect the role of nature. All these things, he discussed in his presentation, and which is very, very important. He also discussed about global assessments. And then very importantly, he talked about extinction risk, pollution, developmental challenges, demographic and socio-cultural changes, institutions and governance, and conflicts. So this is very, very important. He also stressed on Asia-Pacific assessment reports, and said that we are losing a lot of biodiversity. But he again came back to Hindu-Himalayan region and said that we have 36 global biodiversity hotspots, and with more than 35,000 species of plants and 200 plus species of animals. He also talked about governance interventions, and he said that multi-factor interventions is very important. Cross-sectoral, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches would be very, very important to bringing together for science policy integration. So as of now, we are going through a linear approach where research and the research results will be collated, and then that will be given to the governments or the policymakers for developing policies. But then now he has flagged a few important areas where transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary kind of approaches can be applied to bring in farmers, researchers, policymakers, all of them together, and formulate an integrated interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research design or development paradigm. So he also thanked ATREE and the Sikkim University for such a very important research work, and he talked about knowledge co-production, and now in fact we have been able to do this through the multiple, through the collaboration of multiple organizations and institutions, Sikkim University, ATREE, the Mountain Institute, the State Biodiversity Board, the Forest Department, and so on and so forth. So, and after this, then, we heard so much from Dr. Madhu Verma, and she talked about green accounting, which is very, very important. In fact, some of technical terms was very difficult for me to understand because I'm not from the economic background. But then she talked about ecosystem valuation, environmental accounting, and payment on ecosystem services. And this payment and ecosystem services is yet to happen in our parts of the Himalayas. In fact, so much of forest is there, so much of fresh air is produced from our region, and there's fresh water flowing down to the downstream, and it's serving a lot of ecosystem services to downstream population. But we don't know, how this payment on ecosystem services or valuation of ecosystem services can be capitalized in our parts of the Himalayas. So she talked about International Year of Millets. In fact, she talked about a lot of ways to measure ecosystem services and green accounting. She also talked about ecological fiscal transfer, system of green accounting, and biodiversity, land, carbon, water, ecosystem accident, ecosystem conditions, ecosystem services supply, and ecosystem services use. So this is very, very important areas where we have to chip in and maybe learn more from Dr. Madhu Verma, and because she's the installment on this particular area, and because she's already working in Sikkim on organic farming, I think we'll have a lot of opportunities to interact with her in future and learn more from her experiences and expertise. And she also talked about agroecosystems, the agroecological systems, pest management, competing water. There's a competition of water, yes, because we are losing our waters. But then, in the mountain systems as of ours, the springs, the local water sources are the only sources for drinking water and also for irrigation, and we are totally dependent on rain-fed agriculture. And there's a competition on pollinators, so on and so forth. And then she also talked about forest ecosystems, from forest to local, regional, and global level. So there's a trade-off, between the developments and also the conservation. So she also talked about WRI flagship studies, doubling farmers' income in agriculture-based considerations. So this is very important area. In fact, there's a question from Dr. Sarala Carling as to how we can stop migration of our agricultural laborers, and this is happening in Sikkim, also in Darjeeling. Most of our farm laborers are going to the pharmaceuticals or other companies for lucrative jobs or for minimal wage kind of jobs. But then at the same time, we are losing our farmers who would be able to work in the farms. And there are a lot of challenges working in the farms. There's a shortage of drought animals, the energy power. There are risks in farming. The production is very less, so on and so forth. So this is very important area as to how we can double farmers' income, and would be interested to learn more about this from Dr. Madhu. This is very, very interesting. And then we came to understand more about soil science, soil governance, land use planning for ecosystem services. You are very right, Dr. Peake, that we do not have soil policy, we do not have soil law, land use policy or land use law, and every passing year we are losing our agricultural prime land to some other non-agricultural purposes. We lost a lot of agricultural prime land to pharmaceuticals, to hydropower projects for infrastructure building, and also on road building. So road building is an area where there is as such no ecological impact assessment measurement or maybe environment impact assessment. Therefore, we are losing our prime agricultural land for some other reasons, and at the same time also losing our local water sources because of infrastructure development and high intensity dynamite explosion under the mountains, that is in the tunnels. So you talked about soil and its importance, in fact, the significance of water purification, pest and disease control. These are vital services that you talked about, the soil as a habitat, and there are less tangible things that can be seen from soil as well. Construction materials, flood control, agriculture, and so on and so forth. So this is very, very important. In fact, the concentration was on plants and animals and the agriculture systems as such, but then we had never been considered soil as one of the primary components to work into the governance of soil. So soil health is a natural capital, and you said that a lot of carbon sequestration can happen. But then you also raised the question, why is soil survey and agricultural land evaluation relevant to nature and biodiversity? So this is a very important question that you raised, and then because we do not have carried out soil survey and the threats and opportunities, the pollution, the invasives, so on and so forth. So there are vital things that you talked about. In fact, why vital to protect farmlands? In the socio-ecological landscapes, the human-dominated farmlands are the primary land use types, apart from adjacent forest areas. And we have diversity of agroforestry systems. We have diversity of open crop areas and different types of land uses and also land use stages. So this is very important. In a unit land, farmland, we will have a slope land, we'll have a kotebari, we call it, the darbari, kotebari, the bogrekhet. Dana Khet, so on and so forth. And these different parcels of land and forest are vital for growing different varieties of crops, different varieties of fruit plants, and also timber trees and fodder plants. So, and on top of that, our ancestors used to have a small parcel of forest to have a small pond, water resource for animals. So this was what was the interconnection and resource management within the household land holdings, which is now we are losing because people do not understand, these different land use types and, these different small ecosystems and their services for management of this slow plant. And our farmers, our people, our ancestors were so intelligent to convert these slow plants into productive landscapes where we have a forest, we have catchment areas, we have habitats, and on top of everything, we have so much of trees and crop production. So you talked about the protection of farmlands, food security, and then these farmlands are buffer between the urban and natural areas, and you are very correct. In fact, our demarcation of protected areas in our region is such that we do not have buffer forests, and at the end of the farmland you will have protected areas starting from there. So in fact, this is a learning experience to have buffer between the natural areas or urban areas, or between the urban natural areas, and also from the farmlands. So if farmland is lost, forest is at risk. So you are very correct. They are interdependent. Forest and farmlands are interdependent. So modern agriculture systems, the regeneration of agro-ecosystems, food and biodiversity, all these things are very, very important for our understanding in our region. So Dr. Peake, you have given us very important insights about how we can go about the land restoration circle frameworks and understand more about soil governance for our purpose. So soil conservation and legislation is important. We do not have soil legislation here, and I think now we will include this as one of the components in drafting the policy for the government. So this is very, very important, Dr. Peake. You have given us a very good model to understand the soil classification and soil governance. So with this, I think I'm taking much time here because we are running out of time. So with this, I will conclude here because you all are eminent scholars and you have done tremendous research over the years, and my assessment on your presentation is very, very less, and I'm thankful to all the presenters who made such an elaborative and very informative presentation in our seminar, and we will collect and list out all your recommendations for future course of work for drafting the policy framework. So with this, I would like to thank the organizers. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarala Khaling, Dr. Boj Acharya, and others for giving me this opportunity to listen to these eminent scholars here. And I think I have not done justice to all the presenters because they were so informative and so elaborative. I could not bring them into the forefront as a summary. But then we will have we'll look into the same presentations again and work on how we can bring those very, very important vital informations into our policy framework development. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, and thank you to all the respected speakers, eminent scholars, for giving us their insights, their knowledge, and their expertise. So we come to the concluding session. We had a little break time, but I think we'll take another 15 minutes and we'll conclude the seminar. So in the concluding session, we have a very short debriefing from to talk about to remind us about the key takeaways from the 4 sessions that we've had. So I would like to request Dr. Sunita Pradhan, who's a fellow at ATREE, Regional Office, Sikkim, to just very, very quickly, in 5 minutes, debrief us on the key takeaway messages. And this will also be for the benefit of people, or especially the speakers and other people who were not there in the other sessions. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Sunita.
Thank you.